So you ask a simple question online. Within 10-15 minutes you've got 20 different answers, all conflicting, or even some just agreeing, but all from competent people. Who do you trust? What do you do? In this episode, Lauren and I, from DJ Exotics, I'm going to be going through this very issue. But before we get started, 2 bits of housekeeping. Number 1, remember we are animal led, so if Lana gets bored during the episode, we will be replacing him. And second of all, please remember to like, share and comment on the video, but also please subscribe to the channel. Thank you very much. Let's get into the video. So this isn't about the actual act of asking questions on social media or in a forum. That's not the problem. When you're doing that, you're showing good level of wanting to look after your pet reptile. That's not what this is about. It's actually about the behaviour of the people who are giving me advice. Sometimes when you ask a question, you're going to be given lots of answers which are very confident, but are created by people who don't really have the experience or the knowledge, or they do it in such a way which it can be very toxic. Now, this isn't to say that everyone who's going to give you an answer is toxic. Some of them are very well-meaning people. Many of them are probably well-meaning people. But there is, again, and it's always the smaller group of people, the small who ruin it for the larger groups of us. And that's what can put some people off being in the reptile hobby, or even asking a question online, because they are given all these answers from these competent people who shout rather than talk about their experiences or their knowledge. And in this case, this is what we're talking about. Now, sometimes we like to call these people the keyboard warriors, i.e. they sit on their keyboard telling people what to do, how to look after their reptile, without actually listening or understanding or even growing in their own knowledge. And this can be a problem. There are 3 reasons why this is a problem. Number 1, it can be very off-putting, as I've mentioned. Sometimes people who are new to the hobby get so beaten down by some of the answers, even a simple answer of can you have UV or which substrate is best for your leopard gecko, and you'll have people who are very critical, very aggressive in their answers, telling people exactly how it should be done. And this can be very off-putting to new keepers. Second of all, there is no one answer to anything. Now, people can sit there and just go, oh no, that's not true, you must have UV, or you must not use calcium sand. And in some cases, yeah, there is a truth to that. You know, reptile carpet is not a very good substrate. Calcium sand can sometimes be very negative for leopard geckos. But the majority of time, there is actually a wide range of answers that you can give. For instance, even on the UV one, you can give a wide variety of answers, and we'll be going through some of those in a bit. But it's also, you know, you've got to look at the circumstances. You know, sometimes a leopard gecko who might be more scared might be better off in a smaller enclosure. Saying it has to be in a 4 foot when some leopard geckos would actually prefer being a 3 foot is simply not just going to work for some leopard geckos. And that's one of the problems, is that advice needs to be subjective as well as researched scientifically. One of the things I'd like to point out is that also knowledge does not come from just experience. We can all have reptiles kept for 20-30 years, but if you're not doing it right, you've got 20-30 years of doing it wrong, and if you're passing on that knowledge, you're passing on 20-30 years of bad knowledge. You know, it's like me, if I sat there and said, well, I live in a house, I've lived in a house all my life, so therefore I can build a house. Personally, I wouldn't trust that. I haven't gone to school, I haven't studied, I haven't learned anything about building a house, and that's the point. Just because you've kept reptiles does not make you an expert, it just means you've kept reptiles. Now, there are many examples of where this can be done. So let's start off with one of the oldest myths that there was around. And when I started out, this was one of the common myths that was there. And it was about mealworms. And the myth was that mealworms eaten by a leopard gecko could eat their way out of the stomach of the leopard gecko. Now, this is absolute rubbish, and you can't imagine it. But it was a truth that used to go around the social media and the forums. Don't feed your gecko mealworms. They'll eat their way out. The gecko will not kill them. In actual fact, the gecko has 100 sharp teeth in there, quite easily chew down on the mealworm, and it's going to die during the feeding process. It's not going to eat its way out. Even if it did get into the stomach, it's not going to be able to eat its way out. And that's one of the problems. That was 20 years ago. But this same kind of myth is still persistent today. So, for instance, crickets. Now, a more modern myth is that crickets pass pinworms to your reptiles. Now scientifically, this is very inaccurate. Pinworms are host specific. There are different types of pinworms depending on the species of the host that they live in. So reptile pinworms are very different to insect pinworms. So crickets may have pinworms, but those pinworms will not be able to survive in the guts of a leopard gecko. Now, why does this matter? Because essentially what happens is that when you have a leopard gecko or a bearded dragon or any other animal that has pinworms, it's actually probably the cause of bad husbandry rather than what you're feeding them. Crickets are unlikely to survive long enough to be able to take on enough eggs to cause a large production of pinworms. And bearing in mind that there's probably pinworms in the reptiles already, but they're in a small enough number that they're not going to cause any harm. And there has been a study. They tested 2,500 crickets, did not find reptile pinworms in them. They also put them in a system with reptiles. They had this experiment. They bought from 5 different commercial farms. They put them all through. They had the pinworms in. And there was no increase in pinworm production or pinworm infestation within those reptiles. So scientifically, this is actually wrong. Now, the next one that you often hear is about UV. Now, people say that they must have UV, but actually there are 2 studies which have proven that they don't need UV. Now, that doesn't mean that they won't benefit from UV, and that small doses of UV during the day will actually help your gecko thrive, but it's not necessary. What is necessary, and this was proven during the studies, is that they do need the calcium and vitamin supplements, because the geckos that had those were still thriving even if they did not have the UV. And that was important, and that's an important thing to think about, because a lot of the times where people cut down on is actually giving their geckos the proper supplementation through what we use Nutribol, and that gives them the right amount of vitamin A, and that can help with their eyes and their skin and everything else like that. Also, there isn't always a lot of proper information about what UV to use, and some people use too high UV. A lot of people think these guys are from desert areas where it's really bright sun, so they get the strongest desert UV, and that can actually cause skin problems in leopard geckos. And there's a lot more evidence of this. Now, there is a study from a vet that actually had a leopard gecko in, and it actually had damage from UV. The UV was at too high and for too long, that its skin cracked and it had bleeding and ulcerations, and that was caused by UV. So it's not about having UV, it's about always having the proper measurement, and that is one of the problems that you can get with these kind of continuous myths or going online where someone is just going, you must have this. And one of the final ones which you often get is substrate, and this is often you must have this substrate or you must not have this substrate. Now, there are some substrates which I would say definitely not. Reptile carpet is one of those, partly because of the way that reptile carpet is designed, and that's why that has those tiny little fibres that leopard geckos can catch their nails in. Now, that's not to say that reptile carpet couldn't be used for some species. I'm just not sure I would use it for any species. But it's also not very suitable for other species like bearded dragons and things like that. Anything with nails or claws, I would definitely not use it for. So you're kind of limiting it down to snakes, and I'm not sure they would particularly like the sensation of it. Now, there are other problems with like calcium sands, that some geckos will eat that, and that can become an impaction in them, especially if you do not have the right environment, the right kind of husbandry. And this is one of the biggest problems, is that some people just go, oh, don't have loose substrate because it can cause impaction. But yet again, it's often the husbandry, the right heat, temperature, the right feeding regime, and things like that that cause these the impaction, rather than actually the problem of this substrate. Now, that isn't to say that different environments wouldn't benefit. We've got a snake here that should really be on a bark chip kind of substrate, but she herself does not like to go in water to shed. She makes it very difficult. So to help her, we actually have her on a tortoise substrate instead. And since we've done that, her sheds have been absolutely perfect. Now, care guys all say this bark chip, but she has tortoise. And that's one of the other things, that sometimes it's the individual that you need to consider, not for the care guide. And you'll notice that when I give a care guide, I actually say 2 or 3 options to give you the choice and for you to locate the best option for your gecko or your snake, rather than actually telling you outright, you need to do this. And this is what we're going to be going on to, how to spot those red flags. So, How do you spot the keyboard warrior when you're on the forums? There are several options. Now the first red flag is this way is the only correct way. And I've been talking about this throughout this video already. And what we're talking about here is that they give a definitive answer that you must follow. And they will say that no matter what. You could sit there and say, my gecko's an albino, and they will just give you must have UV. Now albinos sometimes have problems with sensitivity to the light, and therefore you might want to adjust your UV to what you would do for, say, a max snow or an eclipse. You might also have a leopard gecko like a supermax snow. Now supermax snows can have very different feeding responses to other max snows or to other leopard geckos. The supermax snow often prefers crickets and locusts, and often can have either an overeating problem or an undereating problem, and those need to be adjusted for as well. Now the second one is the overconfidence. Now this is kind of related to the first one. The first one is all about it must be this way, so they're only giving you one option, and really you should be giving 2 or 3 options in your response that the person can tailor and go about. The other one is overconfidence. So they go in, they think that they know everything because they've kept a leopard gecko. And sometimes they've only kept a leopard gecko for maybe 1 or 2 years, and because they've kept it for 1 or 2 years, suddenly they're the expert. As I said before, I've lived in a house for 20, 30 years. I can't tell you how to build a house. You know, years keeping a reptile does not mean expertise. Expertise comes from study, like I've taken reptile courses, reptile studies, I'm qualified with reptile studies. Or it comes through the actions which you have. So keeping leopard geckos or keeping another species for a long time very healthy, not having health problems, those are the things that make an expert, not just because you've got one in a vivarium in your lounge and you've had it there for 10, 15 years. The other thing that you can often tell is when someone has copy and pasted information from another source. Now this means that they haven't actually gained the knowledge themselves, they've actually just taken advice from somewhere else, and that is a very dangerous problem, because how do they know that that source is accurate? So they could be following someone else's information that could be completely inaccurate. They haven't gained the knowledge for themselves, they don't know what they're doing, what they're doing is just repeating, and that can be a very dangerous problem. And you'll often find in the forums and social media groups that this is a big problem. They will say someone else on the group has said this, and therefore I'm going to replay it, and you don't know that that original person was right. You can't do that. That is not understanding the knowledge yourself. In fact, it's almost plagiarism, which in university terms and studies and things like that wouldn't be very accepted anyway. So we should really throw that one out of the way. The final one is the ones that want to argue it. They're not giving advice, they are arguing their point of view. You must do this because I say so. I know it's right because my cousin had this problem and this is what they did and it solved it. And you know, it's a constant argument. It's not about what's in the best interest of the animal, it's about what's in the best interest to win the argument, for them to have everyone go, yes, you're right. And that can be a major problem because those kind of people do not have what's in the best interest of the animal or the best interest of you as a keeper. They're not allowing you to learn, they're not allowing you to have options, and they're not learning either. They're just spouting their own view, and that can be another problem. And it's also quite toxic. Having that kind of behaviour of it's my way or the highway is not a very accepted way of introducing people to the hobby. Now, I'm just going to put this out here, is that often in these groups, in this form, it's often the loudest voice that wins, but that doesn't mean that the loudest voice is the correct voice. And sometimes what you've got to do is look for the people who are giving you scientific research, all those sorts of things. There's little markers which say this is actually someone who cares about the leopard gecko or about the snake. Remember, I'm holding a leopard gecko, so I keep on saying leopard gecko, but it's about any animal, bearded dragon, leopard gecko, crested gecko, any of those. And these are the people that you need to look out for. Now, there is a few reasons why this happens, and this is something which goes back to my first educational path, which is all about organisational behaviour and things like that. And this is all about social constructionism. Now, this is where something gets into the social fabric and myth of people, and it becomes fact. And this is something that can be seen quite a lot on social media and in forums. So someone says, say, mealworms eat their way out of leopard geckos. And suddenly, because one person says it and they're so convincing, someone else picks it up, and then someone else picks it up. And suddenly, this one comment has sparked a new reality, which is truth. It isn't science, but it's become part of the social fabric and the social myth. It's a bit like an urban legend, like the alligators in the California or Florida sewers. Very much like that. We say they are there, so they must be there. And it's not true. Number one, alligators and crocodiles wouldn't actually survive in the sewer system. There's nothing for them to eat. It's too toxic for them. But because a lot of people said it, it became an urban myth and people believed it. And that's the same thing with any animal care. If someone says it and then someone picks it up and it keeps on getting repeated, then enough people will believe it. And that's why sometimes it can be very dangerous to listen to people on social media without getting proper scientific evidence. Now, the thing with this is that it can be very difficult to discern what is the truth and what is the myth. So what you need to do is have a look for a few clear signs. So number one, you are looking for that science. So someone says in this study, you notice that I will say that with a UV. There are 2 studies which clearly demonstrate that UV is not essential, but it is beneficial. And that's what I'm going to always maintain, because I've got the studies to back that up. But there are other people who will just say, you must do it. And they also sit there and just go, your gecko's not thriving. Well, as humans, can we determine when a gecko is thriving and when it's surviving? And aren't geckos individuals as well, like we are? Sometimes humans thrive in different environments. There are many people who thrive in very high cutthroat sales jobs, but I couldn't do that. And there are people who can't become teachers, and there are people who can't become firemen. And it's the same thing. One leopard gecko may not like a certain type of substrate. Other leopard geckos might really enjoy sand, soil, or homemade substrate, but another one would hate it. And we've had geckos who have gone to new homes and they've had elaborately created vivariums for them, and they've hated them. And the new owners had to rip everything out for the leopard gecko to be happy. And then we've had others who don't like the spout-awesomeness, and the new owners are constantly buying new stuff for them to explore. And it's all about the individual of your gecko. And that's, or your snake. Again, I'm going to keep saying this, or snake, or crested gecko, or bearded dragon. And it's about knowing your individual as well as knowing the species. And that's the thing about these groups, is that they don't know your individual. And your gecko is relying on you to give the proper care. It's not relying on someone online. And therefore, you need to do the proper research, get into the study books, get into online guides, get into watching YouTube videos. You don't have to just watch me. There are plenty of other YouTubers. If you want any recommendations, write down in the comments and I will give you a few recommendations on who I think you should be watching, because there are a lot of good YouTubers out there who can give you good advice as well as myself. Now, if you do go on there and you do ask for help, you go onto any forum or you go onto any social media group and you do ask for advice, I'm not saying don't do that. You can get some really nice people on there. And there are some groups which I would recommend. But if you do this and someone gives you an answer but they don't give you a reason, ask. This gives you the power. If they can't answer with a scientific reason or a good reason, then why take their advice? If they're just saying because, then that is wrong, because they're not thinking about the scenario or your individualness or the gecko or the snake's individualness or anything. And try to, when you ask for information, give as much information as possible, because sometimes that can sway people into giving different responses. For instance, some leopard geckos, which are albino, will not like the UV light, and you might be talking about that. Some might not like certain foods. Some leopard geckos will refuse mealworms, or will refuse crickets, or will refuse locusts. And people will talk about different options. And that's the important thing. You're looking for people who are going to give you options. Ignore the people who are going to just say, it's my way and you're wrong otherwise. So thank you very much for watching today. I know this hasn't been much about reptile care, but it has been a little bit about how you can get the advice for reptile care online. And I think it's very important, because staying away from these environments can be an important way to really enhance your care and enjoyment of keeping a leopard gecko or a snake or anything else like that. And I think that's very important. So I just want to end today with a thing of saying thank you very much for watching. This is a very important topic because it allows us to care better for our reptiles by knowing where we can trust advice. And I'm just going to end it by saying Lauren and I would really love to read your comments about some of the bad advice that you've read on forums or some of the bad behaviour that you've seen, but also comments on some of the good behaviour that you've seen. Where have you found people that are really helpful because they do follow these kind of behaviours, where they're not just giving my way or the highway, but they're giving you options to improve? Apart from that, thank you very much for watching. Please do remember to like, share and comment on the video, and please subscribe to the channel. Thank you very much. Goodbye for now.